Today on Inside Utah Politics, the memory of a Utah tech giant, how Bruce Bastian's loved ones are remembering him and carrying on his legacy of service. And it's wildfire season in Utah now. Find out what it takes to keep our communities safe and what more needs to be done.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Hey, thank you for joining us this week. I'm Brien McElhatten. Let's go inside Utah politics now. Utah tech giant, human rights advocate Bruce Bastian died last weekend. He was a champion of the arts and of LGBTQ rights, and his work to promote equality continues under the B.W. Bastian Foundation. Michael Mariott, the executive director of the foundation, joins us now over Zoom. Mr. Mariott, welcome. I'm glad you're here.
Thanks for having me.
So for those of us who have not met Bruce, never had the pleasure, what are your recollections of him? What was he like to be around?
Bruce was a dynamic individual. I mean, he was a little bit of an introvert, a little quiet and shy sometimes, but once you got to know him, he made some really long-lasting friendships and was just wonderful to be around.
And at what point did you first come to know him? Did you first come into his orbit?
You know, I met him about almost 40 years ago. One of his first employees at WordPerfect just introduced us, and we became friends shortly thereafter. As I worked for Delta Airlines at the time and was traveling around the world, and Bruce was traveling for work. And occasionally we would run into each other in various places, and we just became fast friends.
Yeah. What was it about him that was magnetic, that drew people near him? Because he had a lot of friends.
You know, it's hard to even put it into words, I guess, at the end of the day, because he's such a smart individual. He really drew people in because he just had something to say about something. If he believed in something or he was thinking about something, you were just kind of drawn to what he was talking about or what he was doing. And not only that, but he was just fun. He was funny, and he loved to travel, and so we traveled a lot as friends. And I think just people were drawn to him because he had a point of view, and just a great person.
So you met him, you said, about 40 years ago in the WordPerfect days. I remember using WordPerfect. I remember when that was sort of the standard word processing software across the board. He was co-founder of the WordPerfect Corporation. What do you think made him excel in that role?
Well, you know, he always told me that, you know, music was what led him to the computer work. He was involved with music and was at BYU, and he was trying to use a computer to help work with the marching band. And you know, his work with Alan Ashton in the computer department led him to get his master's in computer science. And so it was kind of an interesting combination of putting those two things together, music, the arts, and computer science. And I think that's what excelled him. He was just so brilliant at writing code and figuring out what needed to be done to do what he wanted it to do was so amazing.
So he was a tech innovator, an entrepreneur, a business leader, and now I want to ask you about his role in the community, advocating for the causes that were near and dear to him. You mentioned the arts, so let's start there. He was a champion of the arts all across the state. What can you tell us about his work in that space?
He reached out to me and he said, "I'm tired of checkbook charity." He said, I've got a sense of purpose. This is what I need to do. I want to go out and be able to be a little bit more thoughtful, about the way I give my money to these causes. And as I said, he had started in music. I mean, music was his passion, and so it led him to wanting to do the arts. To funding arts programs and such. And so when he started the foundation, he said, this is the first thing I want to talk about is how we can affect the arts. He said, I feel it's so important that the arts are in the schools and that kids have access to it, because all of my success has been derived from the arts. And so I think that's where we kind of started. And then it led into kind of writing the mission statement of the foundation, which really he wanted to encapsulate a few things that were so important to him in his life. And so, as we sat down and talked about what was important to him, the arts, and then HIV and AIDS work at the time was an unpopular subject matter, of course. And even before he had even started giving money to the arts and to other things, he was really passionate about trying to take care of people with HIV and AIDS in some of the larger cities anonymously. And so we took some of that work and put it into the foundation itself. And then, of course, that led into the LGBTQ plus equality efforts that he wanted to add into the foundation. And then finally, the rights of individuals was another pillar of the foundation as well. So I think that kind of encapsulated a little bit of all the kinds of things that he wanted to do, and it was never quite enough. And so even after that, we started a small granting to, during the holidays, because he felt it was important to feed people over the holidays and doing all these things. And he said, I'd love to do it all, but I can't. I've got to be very focused in what I do. But, it all started with the arts, I think, at the very beginning, and led us down that path.
Well, you segued perfectly into the B.W. Bastian Foundation and the work that is being carried on. So tell us about the organization and how you hope to carry on Bruce's legacy through the foundation.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit over the last couple of years. What was going to happen if something should happen to him, and obviously we could sunset the foundation, but he said this work is just too important, and so he said that he really wanted the foundation to continue on its work, carrying out its mission, funding these priorities. We've worked very hard to do the work in Utah and the Intermountain West. He was born in Idaho, so we started doing a little bit of work in Idaho and Montana, Wyoming, and he just felt like it was important work to be able to do. And our goal has been to bring some of the national organizations back, and focus some of their work in locally, so that we saw the benefits of it. And so, going forward, I think it's just a matter of keeping the work of the foundation going forward and doing everything that Bruce wanted to do.
Yeah. I wonder if we didn't have Bruce, if he hadn't founded the foundation, if he hadn't advocated for these causes, HIV, LGBTQ rights, the arts, what would Utah look like right now?
It's hard to say. I know that single-handedly, there was times when the Utah AIDS Foundation, when, there's just nobody wanted to support it, and it was a difficult subject at the time. And saving lives at the time was just, I can't even imagine the lives he touched and saved by his philanthropic efforts with regards to organizations like that. He worked very hard to develop Equality Utah, and just working toward those equal rights for the LGBTQ community, of which he was a part. And I think Utah and the Intermountain West states have benefited from his thoughtful guidance and his efforts to just make it a more welcoming place for all people. I think at the end of the day, one of the things that I'm reminded of is that it wasn't really just LGBTQ plus rights. What was important to Bruce was that people loved each other, that they take care of each other, that they respected each other and understood each other. People were true to themselves, and as long as you took care of everyone took care of each other, that the world would be a much better place.
That's a good thought to end on there. Michael Mariott, Chairman, Executive Director, rather, of the B.W. Bastian Foundation, I want to thank you for your time. I'm so sorry for your loss, but I'm glad we could have this conversation.
Thanks for taking time with me.
Yeah, thank you. Coming up, Utah's special session blocking Title IX protections. Hear what local lawmakers and protesters are saying about federal protections for LGBTQ plus students. Utah lawmakers have voted to block federal protections for LGBTQ+ students under Title IX. During this week's special session of the legislature, protesters chanted "Vote No" outside the doors of the Utah House chamber. Our Jonathan May has the latest on this.
Inside the Capitol, you could hear the chants.
They held this session on Juneteenth, and I think that's extremely disrespectful to be fighting one group's civil rights when they should be celebrating another group's. So that especially to me was very frustrating.
Back in April, the Biden administration announced changes to the Department of Education discrimination policies that would have extended those protections to LGBTQ+ students. But today, Utah state lawmakers discuss whether that will take effect in Utah.
Transgender kids are not an enemy. They're not a threat to women. They are kids. They are kids who are struggling to get through life with the odds stacked against them, and we should not be the ones making it harder for them.
This is an example of federal overreach. I don't think there's any accident that the new Title IX language came out just recently.
HCR 301 is a proposal that was voted on. It instructs the state to not comply with any of the Biden administration's new changes using a new law passed earlier this year.
As a woman, I am standing in support of other women, my daughter, and future girls of this state and country to understand that, yes, this protection exists for you. There is a place for you in sports.
I can guarantee you there's 5 in every single one of our 75 districts, at least 5 people who have been harmed by the debate, who've been harmed by the discussion, who've been harmed by the fact that we just even created an online, someone's in the bathroom and they're not supposed to be there. I'm just disappointed we're doing this again and that we're doing it on Juneteenth.
Lawmakers also discuss amendments to SB 161. That issue largely deals with the state taking over the Intermountain Power Project near Delta, Utah. The coal-powered plant serves 23 Utah communities, but has drawn controversy due to fossil fuel involvement in climate change. In the special session, they amended the bill so the state had to make a plan to comply with federal clean air standards if they buy a power plant through the bill.
Reporting from the state capitol, Jonathan May, ABC4 News.
Turning now to Americans facing extreme heat advisories with temperatures expected to hover over 90 degrees all week. Washington correspondent Rashad Hudson tells us some groups want extreme temperatures called a disaster.
The dog days of summer are here. From construction workers, landscapers to first responders, all are feeling the heat.
We are going to see a new record of deaths this year.
Some environmental groups say the impacts from extreme heat should be treated just like a tornado. Jean Sue with the Center for Biological Diversity says that means FEMA should classify it as a major disaster.
We believe that it's broad enough for you to basically recognize extreme heat and wildfire smoke, just as you did for COVID-19.
By recognizing extreme heat as a major disaster, it would open up access to federal dollars for state governments to provide resources like water distribution and cooling centers. In a statement, FEMA says there's nothing specific that precludes a declaration for extreme heat.
What is stopping you from doing so?
FEMA did not offer a reason why it hasn't taken that step. Sue says it's prepared to take legal action if FEMA doesn't act. The American Red Cross says it's important for everyone to be cautious during this heat. At the White House press briefing Tuesday, Karine Jean-Pierre stepped away from the podium to help someone who passed out.
It is hot in here.
We know that heat waves like this can be very dangerous.
Nicole Mall with the American Red Cross offers these tips. Slow down, stay hydrated, and spend time indoors. Reporting in Washington, Rashad Hudson.
Still to come, the costs of fighting wildfires. A local expert is here to break down what it takes to protect our communities and our public lands, too.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Welcome back to Inside Utah Politics. We continue with Utah's 2024 wildfire season off to a busy start. According to Utah Fire Info, more than 270 fires have been reported so far this season. And our next guest, Jonathan Golden, Executive Director of the Wildfire Industry Collective and Legislative Director of Grassroots Wildland Firefighters. He joins us now to share what it takes to fight these fires and what more can be done to support the firefighters who do that important work. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you're a veteran of the wildfire industry. You fought fires for a number of years. Take me back to the beginning and how you got taken by the bug, if you will.
Yeah, you know, it started like so many things. I saw images on the news of, I think, towering flames, and I just kind of had this draw to it that I wanted to be there, wanted to help in any way that I can, like so many people do. So many people in wildfire, they're drawn to service and just need to help. And it really just kind of started from there. And I found, I guess, a sense of community and sense of belonging and adventure and excitement. You know, it seemed like no 2 days were the same. You could start your day one day in Idaho and end up at the Oregon coast by the end of the day.
You could go anywhere.
Yeah, and we would go anywhere, from been on fires in the Arctic Circle down to the Panhandle of Florida. So yeah, it takes you all over the place.
So there are federal wildland firefighters and there are state wildland firefighters, right?
Yep.
You worked in a federal role?
Yeah, that's right. Okay. I am a former Forest Service employee, and I also did a stint with the Bureau of Land Management as well.
So what's the training like? What's the work like? It's grueling, isn't it?
Yeah, so every year we have a set standard training that we have to do to just kind of refresh some basic qualifications to have us qualified to be out on the fire line at a very basic level. But as you advance in your career, there's more training, more qualifications that you acquire. And, you know, it just kind of goes on and progresses. You kind of build off that foundation and go further and higher so that you're no longer a follower, but a leader of wildland firefighters, helping direct some of the tactics and strategies that go on in some of these, you know, small, medium, large incidents.
Yeah.
And so every year it just gets to be a little bit more and more.
So we know we have the Little Twist fire burning down in southern Utah, and who knows what the rest of the season could hold. They're predicting a pretty active season. What's it like right now at the beginning of the season for these firefighters who are out there? What are they going through right now?
Yeah, I think that there's a little bit of just some, you know, anxiousness to get out there and begin to get to work. You know, nobody likes to sit around and wait. I think firefighters are just a can-do group, and so the sooner that they can either get out in the field and either assist with like a prescribed fire operation or get onto like a larger wildfire or initial attack, you know, the happier that they'll find themselves in the beginning of the season.
They're ready to get to it and get to work. But this is a job that traditionally does not pay well, given the amount of work you're doing and the important work that you're doing, right?
Yeah.
And so what's the pay like for a federal wildland firefighter?
Well, you know, for a federal wildland firefighter now, the basement is at $15 an hour, okay. And that's as of the last couple of years, right ahead of the Infrastructure Act. President Biden signed an executive action to increase the base wage to about $15 an hour. Now, through things like the Infrastructure Act that passed, you know, we saw a supplement being offered to wildland firefighters of up to around $20,000 annually, and that's been very helpful, actually, a lot. But you know, that supplement was only temporary, and so there is a real need to have a permanent pay solution get passed so that it becomes long-standing and can actually go towards their retirement benefits as well.
Because there's an issue with retention and recruitment of firefighters when one could go, remember during the pandemic, pay for fast food skyrocketed. You could make $20 an hour at Taco Bell, and the firefighters fresh out of training aren't quite making that.
Yeah, and so there's this, you know, there's this weird, I guess, tension, right, with like, I could make $20 at Taco Bell or Whole Foods or whatever, but, you know, the base wage of a wildland firefighter being at, you know, $15, $16 an hour, and they have to begin to accrue a lot of overtime, hazard pay. It's a pay differential that we get in the federal wildland fire services, and wildland firefighters, you know, knowing this, that they have to get on a fire, to get the overtime, to get the hazard pay, in order to kind of make it through the wintertime. It's very common for wildland firefighters, especially in the federal services, to accrue or try to accrue around 1,000 hours of overtime between June and September, October.
Yeah. So tell me where the federal legislation comes in, because there's a movement in Congress to help remedy this situation, the Wildland Firefighter Paycheck Protection Act, right?
Yeah.
Mitt Romney was someone who moved this through committee in the Senate, but where do we stand now? It's not law at this point.
No, it's not law, and yeah, I mean, a lot of thanks to Senator Romney's leadership on this. He recognizes and understands what wildland firefighters are going through, but it needs to go through the full Senate in order to actually be voted on, and get passed. And same with the House. The House still needs to actually have the multiple committees of jurisdiction, have their oversight hearings on the issue, and then be brought forward to the whole floor of the House and be voted on in order to have it passed and ultimately end up on President Biden's desk.
Why do you think it's languished for so long on Capitol Hill?
That's kind of like the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
It's never an emergency until it is an emergency, and unfortunately, it's when we see high-profile incidents get the attention of lawmakers. Like, for example, 2 nights ago, 500 homes in Ruidoso, New Mexico burned to the ground, and some of those homes belong to wildland firefighters who were actually responding to that wildfire. And so I don't know what the weight is. I'm hopeful that Congress, being they, can have this bill pass, or maybe even attached to something like the National Defense Authorization Act, a must-pass piece of legislation at the end of the year, so that this does become codified.
If the bill does pass into law, what will that allow the industry to do? What will it allow firefighters to do? How will this improve the situation beyond just that base wage?
Right. So there's a little bit of anxiety that has happened every year, since towards the end of the infrastructure law, of like, is Congress going to continue to support the wage increase, the supplemental pay increase that were afforded to wildland firefighters? And one, I think it'll bring a little bit of certainty that'll aid with retention. Two, having it codified into law, it'll help with recruitment, because that then makes that that money eligible to be applied towards your retirement benefits, something that the current supplement does not do, and that goes a long way for wildland firefighters. We have a shorter career than most, and we're always kind of just looking to see how our retirement is going to shape up, knowing that it's kind of not a traditional path.
If people want to get involved and learn more about this, how can they support you? What can they do?
Yeah, I think there are several things that you can do. You can reach out to your legislators, and urge them to pass a Wildland Firefighter Paycheck Protection Act. But then you can go to websites like Grassroots Wildland Firefighters. They are one of the leaders on this issue, along with the National Federation of Federal Employees, NIFE, that is the union that is backing a lot of federal wildland firefighters. There's no shortage of other groups and advocacy elements that are out there supporting wildland firefighters, but those are the 3 things that I can think of off the top of my head to support.
Well, thank you very much. This is an issue we'll be following. As people who live in the West, we see the wildfires every year. We see more of them, it seems, all the time, and we see the season lasting longer and longer. So a lot of work for you and your colleagues to do.
Thank you so much.
And Jonathan, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We'll be right back. Well, that does it for today's Inside Utah Politics. Don't forget, if you have any local political stories you'd like to see, make sure to reach out. You can email us at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow along with me on social media, on X at Brien Reports, and on Instagram. Just search for Brien McElhatten. And find ABC4 on social media to follow along no matter where you are. And while you're at that, you can download the ABC4 News app. We're always on. Thanks for being with us, everybody. We'll see you right back here next week.